The political games begin after a devastating massacre hits two mosques in New Zealand. A gunman opening fire on worshippers in the city of Christchurch, killing at least 49 people and injuring dozens more. But the left already blaming the president.
There's an intolerance that's being spread in this country, in this world, and it comes from the political dialogue. Let's be clear, it comes from political leaders.
Words do have consequences. And we know that at the very pinnacle of power in our own country, people are talking about good people on both sides.
It's all about invaders. It's all about invaders, which is similar language to the killer at the synagogue in Pittsburgh. It's also language that President Trump used in a campaign ad before the midterm election. The word invader means something to white supremacists around the world.
Here with reaction, counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway. Kellyanne, this really bothers me because the media is lying about this guy. He is a kook, he's an absolute lunatic, and I read his manifesto, and what the media is saying about the manifesto is total BS. This guy says, and this is a quote, "The nation with the closest political and social values to my own is the People's Republic of China." He says he's not a conservative, not a Nazi. He's inspired by all these other whack jobs, not Donald Trump. He calls himself an eco-nationalist, obsessed with fertility rates. He's a racist who thinks immigrants are overpopulating the earth and causing global warming. This is who this guy is. He's not a Donald Trump acolyte, yet the media is putting all the blame on the right and the president's supporters.
Well, you're right. They immediately politicize everything. They do something else. They insert themselves. I must speak. I must say something. No, you don't. You can actually shut up and pray for people and wait for the authorities to make their judgments. And in fact, you can also get the facts from the United States authorities, New Zealand. Look at what the president said right away, condemning violence, condemning hate, standing with the people of New Zealand. People believe that we should all be safe everywhere, but in our places of worship, certainly. And don't do things that will inspire a copycat. So actually, this manifesto provided information that we haven't had in many other mass shootings, which is clear evidence of who this person is and what motivates him, but don't let that get in the way of having a conclusion in search of evidence. And there's something else going on. You played a couple clips. I've been noticing in the last 2, 3, 4 weeks, as it's increasingly obvious they have no idea how to defeat Donald Trump in 2020. They keep talking about the 2016 campaign. It's getting a little weird. They're playing all these clips constantly, and I think it's because they don't want to cover the economy. They don't want to cover the strides he's making around the globe. They don't want to cover how he's rebalancing trade. They don't want to cover the fact that he says we have a humanitarian and national security crisis at our own border, and this past Friday provided the first veto of his presidency because he believes that. But the media don't let any of that get in their way. They never let the facts get in the way of their opinions. And by the way, they're speaking to each other. They're not informing the public. They're giving opinions. That's not news. Give us news. And if you're waiting on the news, we can be patient and wait on the news.
No, you're right. They're not informing the public. They're actually lying to the public because I just proved it. You mentioned the immigration situation. You know, they had the vote in the Senate, 59-41. And I just want to read the Republican senators who broke with the president on the national emergency declaration on the border, just so they're aware. It's Rand Paul, Mike Lee, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Lamar Alexander, Mitt Romney, Jerry Moran, Pat Toomey, Rob Portman, Roger Wicker, Marco Rubio, and Roy Blunt. I understand they have their own reasons for doing this. Congress passed the National Emergency Declaration Act. Are they saying that Congress passed an unconstitutional act? I mean, what's the act there if it's not to be used? I understand their point, but at the same time, there is an emergency, and you got to do something because the Democrats do not want to protect the country.
Well, this is not a constitutional crisis. It's a national security crisis at our border. That's what I would call 76,000 migrant aliens being apprehended in February of this year alone. That's what I would call 9 and 10-year-old girls being pumped with birth control by their families before they come here, and then being administered pregnancy tests when they get into at the border, because we know how perilous the journey can come. We know how many women are being sexually assaulted on the journey. I would call it a crisis that we have tons and tons of drugs pouring over our border into our communities. I would call it a crisis that people are being smuggled, and MS-13 gangs and other criminal cartels are coming over the border. That's not everyone, but it shouldn't be one. If it's one, it's 10 too many. And so this president has been consistent for 4 years now, Jesse. We have a crisis at the border. He tried to let Congress do its job. The Congress and the courts have fallen down on the job. They failed to do it. And he is invoking a congressional act from 1976.
Yeah, not that long ago.
43 years old.
Right.
If you don't like that act, then go ahead, Congress, and undo that act.
Right.
They don't have the guts to do that.
No.
So we don't have a constitutional crisis here. We have a humanitarian security crisis. Also, there was a surprise that some of the senators who voted with the president against a disapproval resolution, which he vetoed anyway, that they're running in 2020. You know why? Because they hear in North Carolina and in Nebraska and a couple other places, they hear their voters, their people say, excuse me, you better get back to Washington, do your job, and secure that border.
All right, Kellyanne, there she is at the White House. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesse.
All right, as Democrats argue the Constitution is under attack by President Trump, they're also saying it's outdated, and they've got some of these really progressive ideas to radically change it. So let's debate. With Fox News contributors Doug Schoen and Karl Rove, and Senior VP at America Rising, Alexandra Wilkes. Welcome to all of you.
Thanks
for having us.
Good evening.
Okay, so the president has just weighed in with a couple of new tweets, because in the past he said, listen, going after the popular vote would actually be an easier race to run. Tonight, this is what he's saying in a couple of tweets. Campaigning for the popular vote is much easier and different than campaigning for the Electoral College. It's like training for the 100-yard dash versus a marathon. The brilliance of the Electoral College is that you must go to many states to win, but the popular vote, you go to just the large states. The cities would end up running the country. Smaller states and the entire Midwest would end up losing all power. And we can't let that happen. I used to like the idea of a popular vote, but now realize the Electoral College is far better for the USA. Karl.
Well, I think there's some wisdom in the idea that our country is better served by having a mechanism that takes a close election and gives the victor a bump up, if you will. If you take a look at the elections of, say, 2000 or 2008 or 1992, it helped Bill Clinton govern to be able to have the Electoral College give him a substantial majority and allow him to go forward. We need to have things that draw us together, not things that tear us apart. And the idea that we would go to abolish the Electoral College, first of all, it's never going to happen. 2/3 of both houses of Congress have to approve, and 3/4 of the states have to ratify it. And states like Nebraska and the Dakotas and Idaho and Utah and Wyoming and even a lot of states in the South like Mississippi and Arkansas, they're not going to give up the right to be considered just as important as others by having people come to their states and campaign.
I want to read a tweet that comes from Andrew Surabayan. He says this, that prominent Democrats have now endorsed packing the Supreme Court, changing the voting age to 16, which we're going to debate later, abolishing the Electoral College. So weird how their answer to losing always seems to be, let's just change the rules. I mean, Doug, are they opening themselves up to that kind of criticism by proposing these ideas?
Well, I think that things like the Green New Deal, Medicare for all, jobs for all, abolishing any obligations under student loans are a lot more hot buttons. I think the Electoral College is something that can and should be debated in a non-political setting, as it was after 1968 by Richard Nixon, Hubert Humphrey. I don't think, though, it's mainstream for the party to change the voting age to 16. Packing the Supreme Court is a bad idea. It was a bad idea when FDR considered it. It's a bad idea now. I think the Democrats have a big problem of moving way left on economic and social issues. Third trimester abortions being another one that you alluded to earlier. That, to me, is the problem. Some of these wacky ideas that you read out are just not really, I think, in play, but they sure won't help a party that needs to be in the center to win.
I mean, and Alex, I feel like each day when I get up and we start to see what's bubbling in from the 2020 contenders in Iowa, New Hampshire, all the places that there are, there's a new test every day. And if you don't sign on to it, essentially, the rest of the pack is pulling to the left. And so I'm not sure what's going to come next, but it seems like one of those, it happens in primaries. How do they self-correct this to the general, whomever ends up winning the nomination?
Well, I'm not sure entirely how they're going to do this, considering that a freshman congresswoman was able to come onto the scene and basically get all of the 2020 contenders to start agreeing with banning hamburgers. So, this is a party that's being pulled way to the left. It has been being pulled to the left ever since the 2016 elections, because these early contenders like Elizabeth Warren, what they didn't want to have happen was what happened to Hillary Clinton in 2016, which was a challenge to her left. So you started to see these litmus tests emerge on Medicare for all, and now we're moving into even more extreme territories with the Electoral College, with the court packing. This is something that we've seen on the court packing. We've seen Beto O'Rourke be open to. We've seen Kamala Harris and Kirsten Gillibrand all be open to this idea. And as you mentioned, these are really ideas that are in response to just losing. There's no guiding or limiting principle for Democrats behind these ideas other than these institutions no longer serve them. So I think that they are being pulled all the way to the left, and I'm not sure there's time to course correct.
Well, and if we look more broadly beyond the presidential race and all of these House races that will happen, and the Senate races as well, I mean, Carl, I know that you think, as many people do, there are a lot of Democrats on the Hill who are uncomfortable because it was those swing districts, those moderate districts, that gave them back the House, and now the only headlines that we're seeing are the most radical members of their freshman class. They're getting all the attention.
Yeah, they are, and you're right. And you mentioned earlier, that how this would play out in the primary and affect the general election. Remember, we're going to have an unusually long primary season. It's already started, and it's going to go about 18 months until the Democrats meet in, from start to finish. And when they finish, they're going to meet at their convention in Milwaukee. And then there's going to be just over 4 months between that convention and the general election. So the impression that the American people develop during this primary season of the Democratic Party, with all these sort of far out sort of socialist ideas and very left-wing ideas, is going to be hard to erase in a matter of 4.5 months between the Democratic Convention and the November 2020 general election.
Yeah, and Doug, quickly, I mean, new polling from CNN of all places shows that a vast majority of people think the economy is in good shape. They actually feel good about how they're doing. So is that, for now, an issue that's off the table for Democrats, and that's why they're focusing on some of these other outliers?
It's not off the table. Issues like income inequality and wage stagnation remain strong, and the president's numbers are underwater. So there is a Democratic narrative, but it's a pro-growth, centrist, inclusive narrative, not redistribution, as most of the candidates are now emphasizing.
All right, Doug, Carl, and Alex, please come
Thank
back
you.
soon. Great to have all of you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.